Chapter 2, Gentle Ben. When Mark's father married Ellen Richards, he had promised to build her a home anywhere she wanted. She had chosen a spot above the town so that on one side Orca City's roofs and the bay lay patterned below them. On the other, the tundra, gently sloping, stretched away to join the distant mountains. Ellen loved the tundra side because it reminded her of the rolling acres of her eastern Washington wheat farm home. Carl Anderson had built one of Orca City's nicest homes for his bride. It was a two-story white house surrounded by a rarity in this northern village, a well-clipped lawn. When he opened the door, the first thing Mark saw was his father standing in the middle of the warm kitchen. He was a tall, wind-tanned man with a heavy bone frame and a straight, firm line of mouth and sun-bleached brows. He carried his shoulders squared, his head high. It was topped by cotton-fine blonde hair, and that too was bleached lighter by the sun and the sea. For a moment Mark froze, awaiting his father's question, but his father said, "Well, it's about time. Supper's ready. Hurry up and wash." Mark closed the door and ran upstairs to his room to leave his sweater and books. That was close. He'd have to keep track of time more carefully after this. His mother kissed him when he came down and asked, "Did you have a good day at school?" "I didn't miss a single homework problem," he said proudly. "That's great," she said, but she didn't seem as pleased as he had hoped she would be. "Did you eat all your lunch?" "I left a sandwich in my desk. I forgot it." At least he thought it was kind of half true. "Did you play baseball after school?" "No." He felt trapped by his mother's unaccustomed probing. He fearfully awaited her next question, but she merely continued to move between the stove and table with steaming dishes. As Mark watched her swift, sure movements, he wondered if his mother would ever get old. He bet she wouldn't. His father often said she was just as pretty now as when she came north to teach in Orca City's grade school more than 15 years ago. In deference to his mom, they ate in the dining room at night. During the meal, which his mother insisted was dinner, not supper, Mark's father told them what had happened in town and along the waterfront. Like every senior, he was making his own boat, the Far North, ready for the coming season. The Far North boat was 49 feet long and could carry 10,000 salmon in the hold. The crew consisted of Clearwater, an old-time Alaskan, and a third man whom they would pick up from among the new arrivals in town. Carl Anderson had bought the Far North 4 years ago. He had made the final payment on her this spring. The payments were big. Mark knew that more than once his parents had worried about whether they'd be able to make them. His mom had baked a cake in celebration of the last payment, and they invited Clearwater up for dinner. They had toasted the Far North, and his father had waved the papers and said, "There she is, she's all yours. That's a load off my back like a 10-ton anchor. Now maybe we'll make a little money for a change." "There's more than 200 seniors here already," his father was saying. "A couple came in today from way down in the Mexican waters. They're really tuna clippers temporarily rigged for seining." His mother asked about their own boat. "We'll finish overhauling the motor next week," Carl said with satisfaction. "Clearwater will have the seine patched by tomorrow night. That big sea lion tore it up pretty bad last year when he charged into it." Mark, half listening, was toying with his food. He was brought up suddenly by a sharp question from his father. "Mark, did you go downtown today and buy some candy?" Mark looked up, startled. "No, Dad, why?" "You're not eating. When I was your age, they practically had to nail down the plates." His mother said anxiously, "Clams rolled in cracker crumbs and fried in butter, Mark. It's one of your favorites." "I'm not hungry, honest, Mom." His father shook his blonde head. "That's just not natural. You gotta eat more. You're too thin. You're too white. You're never gonna get any muscle at this rate," he said in a positive voice. His mother said gently, "Maybe you'll want something later. Anyway, drink your milk and try to finish that one clam." There was quiet for a while. Then into the silence his father said, "Fog Benson stopped by today and offered to sell me that bear he's got chained up there in that shed. He wants $100. "Why does he want to sell him?" Ellen asked. "He needs the money to fix his boat. He's broke as usual. I also have a feeling he's getting kind of scared of that bear. He can't drag the animal downtown anymore because he's too big. Fogg can't handle him, and the bear's too dangerous to be out. So rather than just shoot him, he'll get a little money out of him if he can. I heard tonight he's trying to sell chances on him, $5 a throw. The lucky winner can take the bear out in the tundra, turn him loose, and use him for target practice. That's brutal, Ellen said angrily. The town ought to stop that. No one seems interested. Anyway, Fogg's got a problem. Outside a zoo, who wants to buy a bear? Mark's heart had started hammering as his father's first words. The mention of shooting Ben was too much, but he hardly realized he had spoken aloud the thought that flooded his mind until he heard his father's voice. Buy the bear for you? What? You want him? Mark met his father's blue eyes and dropped his fork in his confusion. Carl Anderson leaned across the tables. His eyes were piercing Mark. You mean it? You want that bear? You want Fogg Benson's bear? Do you even know what you're talking about? Mark was afraid to look at his dad, whose blue eyes could be as cold as a glacier. They looked right through you out of that broad, weather-brown face with its long, square jaw. But since he had gone this far, Mark realized there was nothing for it now but to go on. He raised his eyes briefly to meet his father's gaze, then he looked at his plate. I know, but I just want him, Dad, he mumbled miserably. Carl studied his small son a moment, and he looked at Mark's mother and he said in a quiet voice, I think he means it. He really wants that bear. I don't get it. His mom circled the table and put her arms around Mark. Tell your father what happened a few weeks ago. Mark looked up into his mother's smiling face. Mother, you know? He asked wonderingly. Did you think you could come home late every day with bear hair on your clothes without me knowing? Now tell your father. Tell me what? What's going on? His father demanded. Mark, taking courage within his mother's arms, said in a rush, I was coming home from school one night and there was Ben. There was the bear coming right up the trail toward me, dragging his chain. He'd broken the snap and was loose. Weren't you frightened? His mother asked. Of Ben? Mark asked, surprised. Go on, his father said impatiently. Well, I took him back to the shed and I tied him up, Mark finished lamely. His father slapped his hands against his knees and said, Just like that? You have me believe you just walked right up to him, picked up the chain, led him back and tied him up, a 5-year-old brown bear, half grown? Well, I petted him some first and scratched his ears and rubbed him under his chin. He likes being scratched under the chin. Holy mackerel, his father said. Holy mackerel. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. He looked at Mark's mother accusingly. You've known this all along? Almost. She combed Mark's straight hair with her fingers. Mrs. Miller told me she had seen Mark leading Ben back to the shed the day he got loose. You should have told me. Fooling around with a brute like that. Good Lord, Ellen. It's a wonder that Mark's alive. You and Clearwater were busy working on the boat. Besides, I watched him every day. Mother, how could you? Mark asked. I never saw you. Well, you didn't look in the back of the shed. You just untied Ben every day and you sat in the doorway and you fed him the lunch you never ate. She looked at her husband. I was worried the first few times, so I took the rifle with me. Then I began to realize there was nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about, his dad shouted, shoving his chair back. Do you know what a brown bear is? Of course, his wife said. Mark looked at his mother in amazement. There was a soft look about her small little boned body, her shiny black well-kept hair and smooth, lightly tanned face, but there was nothing soft in the way she faced his father. How could she be so calm and sure in the face of his anger? A brown bear, she quoted, is the largest, most dangerous big game animal in North America. He's the largest carnivorous animal on Earth. He is the last living relic of those fabulous hairy mammals of the Ice Age who migrated from Asia and Russia millions of years ago, such as the giant sloth and the saber-toothed tiger. He is a direct descendant of the legendary Siberian cave bear. Very good, his father said with sarcasm, but you left out that he also happens to be the most unpredictable animal on Earth. Oh, that's local gossip. It's the opinion of everyone who's ever come up against them. What's wrong with you, Ellen? You've lived here 15 years. You know better. And you are his mother. Don't you understand the danger in this? His mother's face became grave. She said to Mark, "If you're through eating, why don't you run up to your room and do your homework?" Mark could have told her that this was Friday night and that he had never did homework before Saturday night, but the anger between his parents and his father's temper frightened him. He was glad to get away. He slipped off his chair without looking at his dad, ran from the room and up the stairs. He leaned against the closed door, his whole body shaking, his heart pounding. How had it happened so fast? One moment everything had been fine. His mother and father were smiling and happy, the feeling of family closeness, a warmth in the room. The next moment his father was angry. What he had said about wanting Ben had caused this, of course, if only it hadn't slipped out. But in a way he was glad it had. The fear of being found out was over at last. He hadn't dreamed his father would be so angry. They would be talking about him and Ben down there now. He wished he could know what they were saying. He thought of the register in the hall floor. His father had installed it several years ago, so the heat from downstairs could come up to warm the second floor in the winter. He eased the door open, crept down the hall, and stretched out on his stomach by the metal grill. The dining table was directly below. His father's blond head was on one side and his mother's smooth dark one on the other. He could hear their voices plainly. His mother was saying in a quiet, serious voice, "There's something I haven't told you, Carl." "I'll say there is," his father said. "I'm not talking about a tame bear." His father did not answer for a moment, but when he did, the anger was gone. "All right," he asked, "what is it?" Mark could see his mother's slender hands twisted together before on his tabletop. "Remember how it was with Jamie?" "How could I forget?" his father said gently. He stretched a long arm across the table and covered her clenched hands with his big brown one. "That's why I don't want Mark fooling around with that bear. He's all we have left." His mama's voice sounded hurt and frightened. "He's too thin. He doesn't eat very well. He sits around and does nothing. He has no vitality and he's so pale." "Oh, he's just taken a growth spurt," his father soothed. "All boys go through it. We said that about Jamie and it wasn't true. What are you trying to tell me?" "Well, I took Mark to Dr. Walker for his checkup. He said Mark shows every indication of being ripe for the same trouble Jamie had." "Tuberculosis?" His father reared back in his chair. "I don't believe it. Walker's not perfect. He can be wrong. He's always hanging crepe. The boy's just taken a spurt of growth, I tell you." He was almost yelling. "Can't Walker say something hopeful and cheerful for once?" "He said there were indications," Mark's mother said patiently. "Mark was exposed, you know, but Mark does not have it now. If we can build up some of his immunities, he'll be okay. We did not have that chance with Jamie." Mark dismissed the talk about himself. The important thing was what they might say about Ben. His father was speaking again. "All right, what does he need?" "Lots of exercise, outdoor exercise to toughen him up. Good wholesome food to eat and plenty of rest." "Well, that's easy enough." "No, it's hard," his mother said. "Stop and think. Who does Mark have to play with? This is a small school. The children his size are younger and several grades lower. He has nothing in common with them. Those his own age and in his grade are bigger and stronger. He's not capable of playing with them. He doesn't want to play. He'd rather stay in or read or just lay around and do nothing." "Make him go out," his father said. "Sometimes you have to make kids do things." His mother shook her dark head. "I do make him go out, but I can't make him play. And what would he play all alone? He needs an interest or something that will challenge him. Lately, he's found an interest." "Do you mean that bear?" Mark held his breath, waiting. "If he needs a pet, we'll get him a dog." "It's too late," his mother's voice answered. "Mark's given his heart to Ben." "That's nonsense. I knew a little girl in the States who had a full-grown lion for his pet," his mother said calmly. It went to the school bus with her in the morning and waited beside the road for her at night. She could have had a dog or a horse, but she loved the lion. "There's no sense to that kind of argument," his father said. "The whole idea is crazy." "You once told me you had a pet seal. You must have seen thousands of baby seals and dogs up here. Why a baby seal, Carl? And why that one? Do you remember how that was?" Mark did not know his father had ever had a pet. He brought his ear closer to the register so as not to miss a word. Yeah, I remember, his father said. He was a little fella sunning himself on a log. I rowed the boat toward him, and he lay there and he watched me with his big eyes, and he wasn't even afraid. We looked at each other, and suddenly I wanted him more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. My dad argued and tried to reason with me, but it was no use. Finally, he let me keep the seal. I had him until he weighed over 100 pounds and was a nuisance. A fisherman eventually killed him. So his father had had a seal pet for when he was a boy. Then he must understand how it is with Ben and me, Mark thought, his heart beginning to hammer. Why didn't you choose a dog or even some other animal? Mark heard his mother ask. I don't know, Carl answered. It just had to be that one seal, the way he looked at me. I had a baby coyote, Mark's mother said. I picked up that mangy little scrub on the prairie when we had a whole farm full of domestic animals I could love. I don't know. I only know that sometimes something does happen between people and animals. There seems to be a bond that overcomes fear, everything objectionable. I suppose you might call it a perfect love, a sort of biblical lion and the lamb kind of love. It happened to me and my little coyote. It was the most wonderful thing in the world to me at the time. It would happen with you and your seal. A lot of fishermen pick up baby seals and keep them a few weeks, his father said. They're cute. Well, that's not why you picked up yours. This kind of talk is crazy, Ellen. A baby seal is no big brown bear. What I'm saying, she said patiently, is that some wonderful thing that happened to us and our pets has happened to Mark and Ben. That's why I'm not afraid. It came to Mark with a shock that his mother was actually arguing with his father for him and Ben. She was standing up to his father. She looked as soft as a young girl with her pliant body, her slender hands, her small head. As his father had once said, underneath Ellen's tough as whalebone, if she could stand against his father, maybe, Mark thought wildly, oh, just maybe. How can you be so sure? His father asked. I've watched them together for 2 weeks. Okay, his father's voice bored in again. For the sake of argument, let's suppose you're right. Do you know what would happen if Ben turned ugly for 1 second and took a swipe at Mark with his paw? I've thought about that possibility, his mother said, but I just keep asking myself knowing what I do now, if we'd had this chance to save Jamie, would I have taken it? And I would have. You're willing to risk Mark's life with Ben on some feeling that those two understand each other and nothing bad will happen? Oh, it's not just a feeling and it's not vague, she said. I know. I also know how wild this seems. At first it sent me into a panic when I thought of it. It took days to get used to the thoughts, but we have to do something and we have to do it now. If we were in a city in the States, there'd be all sorts of measures we could take, but we aren't. We're in Alaska, 2,000 miles from a big city. We have to make do with what we have. How would owning a bear help with that? Mark wants him so much. Ben can be the incentive that drives him out to work. Lots of outdoor exercise, Dr. Walker said. He'll have to exercise plenty for Ben's keep. He'll have to cut and dry grass for bedding, see the shed is kept clean. He'd have to earn the fish Ben eats and whatever else he gives him. Don't you see? We could add as many requirements as we think necessary to help build up Mark's health. I could do those things easy, Mark thought, his hopes soaring with his mother's arguments. I could do a lot more than that, he was thinking. His father said, you got it all figured out now, haven't you? You're sure we're not just blowing up a storm of worry because of what happened to Jamie? Jamie made me aware of the danger signals. I see those signals in Mark. Don't you see them? His father nodded. I guess I just haven't wanted to admit it. He walked around the table, put his hands on Ellen's shoulders. His voice was gentle. This is the craziest idea I've ever heard. The way you explain it, it sounds reasonable. But it's not, Ellen. Not a brown bear. I've known of at least 2 men who were badly mauled by them, and I saw one that had been killed. It was not a pretty sight. People have been mauled by dogs, she said, but that hasn't condemned all dogs. Perhaps I'm prejudiced, but to me it's a little like jumping off a burning ship and not being able to swim. Not in this case, she said promptly. Maybe if I had as long to get used to the idea as you have, it would have made a difference. But this, Ellen, he dropped his hands and turned toward the coast closet. I'm willing to do almost anything, and we will do something. We'll talk about this tomorrow. I've got to go down to the boat for a while. Carl, Mark's mother did not turn her head. Do you really think this will change your mind? Mark could hear his father struggling into his coat. No, he said, not at all. He went out, closing the door behind him. Mark edged back from the register, carefully tiptoed to his room, and closed the door. His hopes, so high a moment ago, were destroyed. He could tell by his father's voice and the way he had closed the door he was not going to change his mind. His dream of owning Ben was gone forever. In fact, he faced it now for the first time. It had always been just a dream. He should have known it could never become true. Tomorrow, the day after, Ben would be taken out and shot by a sportsman whose $5 chance had won him the right to shoot a trusting bear.